Must be gone.
Good afternoon. We are here for a study session to review this Schilling hazardous waste cleanup project. I will turn it over to City Manager Mike Scragg.
Thank you, Mayor. This is really just intended to be a status update. You, on occasion, have asked, you and others have asked about the status of the project. There's been a lot of work going on behind the scenes, and we have an action item on today's agenda as well. But Martha Tasker, Utilities Director, is our primary point of responsibility for the City of Salina. As you know, it's a joint effort of what we call the Salina Public Entities. So it's the City of Salina, Salina Airport Authority, USD 305, and K-State Salina. As a little bit of background, those parties had ownership of different property in the area that was the former Schilling Air Force Base, and so they ended up quite some time ago being jointly involved in pursuing a remedy with the Department of Justice and the military and the Army Corps of Engineers. So with that, I will turn it over to Martha Tasker to make any additional introductions, and then I believe Matt Schroeder with Dragon is on the line and will actually be presenting the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Scragg. I really don't have a lot more to say other than we got Matt Schroeder with the Dragon Corporation on by Zoom, and together we've prepared a PowerPoint presentation for you today. And I'd like you, as we go through, if you have any questions at all, to ask your question when we're there, because hopefully we'll give you enough detail to know where we're at on the project. And as Mr. Scragg mentioned, we do have an item on the agenda later to be approved, so if you have any questions about that, we could also bring you up to date on anything you might need to know about Plume B and the soil remediation. So with that being said, I'll turn it over to Matt Schroeder and he'll start through his PowerPoint presentation. Thank you.
First off, thank you for inviting me to be on the call today and update you guys. As was mentioned, I am the project manager for the Schilling project, which is the result of military activities from long ago at the former Air Force Base. The update today will discuss a little bit of the big picture of what we are going to be doing soon, and then what is maybe a little further out. Just as background, from 2013 to 2018, the Salina Public Entities completed an investigation and agreed to a remediation plan with KDHE, and then through a mediation in the next couple of years, this public entities reached a settlement with U.S. government, and that's what is funding the remediation that we're going to be discussing. Next slide. So the main problem out at the Air Force Base is that the groundwater, which eventually serves as the city's drinking water supply, is impacted by mostly chlorinated solvents, chemicals like trichloroethylene and carbon tetrachloride. We've got a total of 11 plumes that we've identified at the site, and the main ones are identified on this slide. So A, B, C, and D, which are all kind of commingled together in one plume. And then plumes E, F, and G are the others that are the main concern for us. You see some other yellow outlined plumes there. Those aren't as much of a concern for us, and then those really won't be discussed too much in this presentation. So the main concerns we have from a health perspective are impacts to the city's water supply down the road if nothing was done, and also the potential for people working or going to school above the contaminated areas to be breathing harmful vapors. Next slide. So in general, the idea for the remediation design was to address the highest risk areas first, and then over time try and work on cleaning up the whole plume. So we wanted to make sure we addressed the vapor intrusion risk. That's the part I talked about, potentially breathing harmful vapors, by addressing the soil sources early, because those are generally the source of those vapors. And then we would address the highest concentration groundwater areas using a system that I'll talk about later called a DGR system. And then lastly, we'll protect the city's water supply by installing barriers at the downstream end of the plumes to make sure that they don't migrate any further to the city's water supply. Next slide. So the CAD is called a corrective action decision, and that's a term for a KDHE decision on a remediation plan. And so this is the portion of that plan that deals with the soil sources. And we believe that these are the sources of the impacts to the groundwater. And so that's why we're also addressing these early on in the remediation, in addition to the benefit to the vapor intrusion side of things. The one we'll be addressing first, and the one you'll be discussing a little later today, is plume B, and that's the orange arrow there. That is simply going to be excavate and offsite disposal of impacted soil. And then next we're looking at plumes A and C. A is on the airport property near the hangars. C is K-State's campus, and there we're going to use a process called in situ thermal desorption, which I'll discuss a little bit later. And then further to the south, plumes F and G were recently recharacterized, and I'll get into a little bit of that later in the presentation. And we're trying to reformulate our remediation plan for those to make sure that we're addressing those in the best manner. Next slide. So as I mentioned, plume B will be simple excavation and offsite disposal. In between, we'll characterize that soil, and if the contaminant concentrations are high, the soil will be transported to a licensed landfill. If the concentrations are below KDHE standards, we'll return that soil to the excavation as backfill. Next slide. So as I mentioned, for plumes A and C, we're going to use a process called in situ thermal desorption. And in this process, heat and vacuum are applied simultaneously to the impacted area of the subsurface soils. And as the temperature rises, volatile contaminants like trichloroethylene, which is our main contaminant in these areas, become vapors that can be collected and treated. Think of a big vacuum cleaner that's sucking up these vapors and pushing them towards a treatment system. And one of the reasons we chose this technology is it works really well in clayey soil, which we have at the airport, and also in bedrock and at deep depths. Next slide. So to address the groundwater impacts at the former Air Force Base, we have a couple of different ways that we're going to do that. First off is what I just mentioned about remediating the soil sources. So removing those takes away the areas that are impacting the groundwater continuously. And in addition to that, we're going to treat the highest concentrations in the groundwater using a directed groundwater recirculation, or DGR system. I'll talk a little bit about specifics of how that works in a minute. And then lastly, we're going to install barriers at the end of the plumes, as I discussed. And I'll give a little more detail about how those work too. Next slide. So to remediate the groundwater plumes, we're planning this directed groundwater recirculation system. Groundwater is pumped from the ground, piped to a central treatment building where different technologies will remove the contaminants and also add amendments to the treated water. The water will then be re-injected around the plumes to push clean water kind of through the plumes and clean out the plumes a little faster than just pumping it out alone. Then the amendments we're adding to the plumes will help speed the biological processes that naturally break down the contaminants in the subsurface. So in that way, we'll be able to both remove contaminants above ground in a treatment system and also get some removal below ground through natural processes that we're going to kind of jumpstart. Next slide. At the end of the plumes, we're going to install these permeable reactive barriers, or PRB. And that's a wall that we create below the ground to clean up contaminated groundwater. The wall is permeable, which means that water can flow through it. and it's made up of reactive materials that make the wall either trap contaminants within it or make them less harmful as they pass through. In our case, we're going to use a reactive material that breaks the materials down as they pass through the wall, and cleaner water comes out the other side. Next slide. So recently we did a number of investigative tasks to get better data for our remedial design. So we did something called high resolution site characterization, which generally means that we gather a lot of data over a small area in plumes A and C where we're planning thermal treatment. We did the same at the source areas for plumes F and G. And as I mentioned, that's where we're going to be reevaluating what we had planned for the remediation to make sure it's the best fit. We did the same at the downgrading ends of plumes D, E, F, and G, and that made sure that we're going to be installing those permeable reactive barriers exactly where they should be, and at the reactive material that should be there. And then we also did a number of tests on extraction and injection wells to make sure that our groundwater recirculation system is properly designed. Next slide. So this is the overall schedule that I think you guys see periodically from either Martha or Mike. Probably a little bit too much detail here to talk about on the screen, but I wanted you guys to have it in the packet so that you had the full detail of what we have planned over the next few years for the remediation. But I'll talk in the next few slides about some of the immediate things that we have planned. Next slide. So in general, the process for each remedial task includes completing our remedial design, getting approval from KDHE, soliciting contractors, selecting contractors, and then implementation of those remedial actions. So the start date that we have planned for plume B is hopefully second quarter of 2024, assuming everything goes well. We just recently moved some utilities that were running through the area that we planned to do that remediation, and that was completed in February. And then, as Martha mentioned, the bid award is on your agenda for today. Next slide. So the next things we have planned are we'd like to get the injected PRBs installed. Those are the ones down at the downgrading end of the plumes to prevent any further migration. Also want to get the thermal treatment in plumes A and C moving along. The injected PRBs, those should probably be about 6 months, I would think, to install. And then once those are installed, those kind of work in perpetuity without any real action from us. The thermal treatment, once installed, lasts about 18 months, and I suspect it'll probably take 3 or 4 months to install. So approximately a 2-year process for that. And then we're still figuring out what we're going to be doing for plumes F and G, but those would be next up after the thermal treatment, is to figure out how and what to do in those source areas. Next slide. The DGR system is partially completed in design. We are in internal review of the 30% design right now and anticipate submitting that to KDHE in the second quarter. Shooting towards having a full design submitted to KDHE in the beginning part of 2025. And if all goes well, we would start construction in the third quarter of 2025 and be able to start the system up and get it running in the second quarter of 2027. And that system is anticipated to run for 20 years, followed by approximately 8 years of monitoring to make sure that the remediation was completed. And with that, I can turn it over for any questions that you guys may have, and we can revisit any of the slides if those would be helpful to illustrate the questions.
Thank you. Any questions?
Matt, you mentioned public water, protecting the public water supply, but could you speak to the connectivity of this location and our public water supply sources and
Yes.
just kind of reassure everyone where
Yeah.
it's located and what's in place.
Yeah, so it's in the same water bearing unit, which we call an aquifer, of the city's drinking water wells. But it's quite a distance from those wells. And the other thing is that the soil where our impacts are is much less permeable, so the water moves slower in this soil. So we have time to implement this remediation. We did some modeling and saw that if nothing was done, it would be approximately 80 to 100 years before these impacts would reach the city's drinking water wells. Now, that said, we want to clean the impacts up right now, because the longer we wait, the bigger the problem gets, the more expensive it'll be to clean it up to make sure that it doesn't reach the drinking water supply. So we're going to be doing what we need to be doing, but it's not an imminent threat to the city's drinking water supply.
You might touch on the monitoring well aspect as well.
Yeah, we do consistent monitoring. We have over 200 monitoring wells where we collect samples and test them on at least an annual basis for each well to make sure that the groundwater plumes aren't moving faster than we think they would be, or going in a direction that we don't think they would be. So we're kind of keeping an eye on things while we're doing these remedial tasks to make sure that we're not missing anything.
And then PFAS is a relatively new topic. Can you speak to that, please?
Sure. Yeah, in about 2016, we realized through some investigations that the Air Force had done that quite a few of their former bases had this chemical group called PFAS. And it was kind of a new chemical to our world. There wasn't a lot of data out there about its toxicity, what levels are safe, etc. So we decided we would test our wells to see if we had it at this base, and found it in a couple of areas, much smaller areas than the groundwater plumes that I showed for the chlorinated solvents. Fortunately, if we can say it that way, the best treatment method for PFAS is to pump it out of the ground and treat it with generally something that removes it from the water above ground. And we were already planning that exact treatment with our directed groundwater recirculation system. So what we did for that was we had to add a process within our treatment process that removed the PFAS. But other than that, hasn't really changed our remediation plan much. We do monitor for PFAS also to make sure that that is not popping up in any places we don't expect it. And so far, we haven't had any surprises there. But the PFAS treatment will be part of our remediation process for foreseeable future.
And I keep putting you on the spot, but if you would, elaborate on the design, bench testing, how it is that you're customizing the design of our system.
Yeah. So we have a partner firm, Olson and Associates, that is designing kind of the infrastructure of the system. So the wells, the pipes, the treatment building, how it all fits together. And we are also testing any new technologies that we think might have an economic benefit or a technical benefit, especially for PFAS. For the chlorinated solvents, it's pretty well understood the best ways to remove those, but because the PFAS are so new, there's a lot of new technologies that are just on the verge of becoming viable and may have some benefit to us. And so we actually applied for and got a grant from KDHE to put in a area within our treatment building where we can test new technologies for PFAS testing, for PFAS removal. And so that's something I'm kind of excited about. But outside of that, we've also had two different companies do a little demonstration project to try and show us whether their technology would be best for us. One of those didn't really turn out to be economically beneficial, so we set that one aside. Another one is still in process, and we're still evaluating that data.
Is one of those companies the local company that was interested in the project?
Yeah, their name is Flowtration, and they are running a what we call a pilot study. So they are actually taking groundwater from our site and treating it in a trailer that they have on near KSU's campus, and trying to remove the contaminants in there with their process.
On the project we're going to hear today on evacuation, if that soil test positive, will it have to haul to out of state somewhere, or?
Actually, we anticipate that the levels are, while above KDHE standards, are not high enough that it will have to go to a hazardous waste landfill. It should be able to go to the Salina landfill here locally. Obviously, we'll be testing it as we're excavating it, and if we find anything that has really high concentrations, then we'll make sure that goes to where it should be. But based on the testing we have so far, we think everything that needs to go to the landfill will be able to stay at the local landfill.
So it would be able to be utilized by the landfill like they normally use soil?
Yeah, it will go in their landfill. I can't speak to exactly where they'll need to put it.
Mr.
They
Deutsch
have
says no.
some of their own processes.
You don't have the benefit of seeing the room, Matt. The public works directors in the back of the room will accept the dirt, but it won't be used as cover material like we might use other dirt.
That's what we have planned in our overall project cost, is that the soil, in my discussions with Mr. Teutsch, is that if its levels were not contaminated, we'd probably be using it at our site. Once it goes to the landfill, then we'll more than likely have to pay a tipping fee for that material to be placed out there, and he doesn't feel like, with what we know, that it would be able to be used as cover. So we're anticipating it's going there, but we'll have a fee for doing that. We might get surprised when we do our soil testing, but until we do that, Jim and I could not come to a final determination on what the end result would be, but we're going to sort it in different piles, and I think it calls for testing every 300 cubic yards, so we'll have a pretty good sort test to evaluate it and determine where and what it should be used for.
And not to sidetrack the conversation too much, but this actually is something that comes up, I don't want to say frequently, but every now and then, where a private business will have a similar circumstance where they have dirt that exceeds the KDHE threshold, doesn't rise to the hazardous threshold, and then we have a conversation about will the landfill accept it, under what conditions, at what fee, and there's often a misconception that it's dirt, we can just use it like any other dirt, but the point is, if it were any other dirt, it wouldn't be coming to the landfill in the first place. So it does have limitations on what we can use it for.
I had a question on the DGR. Will there be numerous sites set up over different plumes, and do those remain for an extended period of time, or do they clean the water and then they're removed, or are they left there for years to come?
So a little bit of both. Our plan is that all of the water would be piped to a central treatment system in generally the center of the site. And then after the water is treated and amended, pumped back out to the plumes to be re-injected. And as you mentioned, some of these areas will likely clean up faster than others. And so as those areas clean up, we will decommission those sections of the system, remove that infrastructure. The treatment system itself, the treatment building, will likely stay through the duration of the 20 years that we expect it to operate.
I can imagine this whole system is going to be use a lot of power and energy. Is there going to be separate meters set out there, and is it all going to be electric, or will the heat be generated by natural gas?
For the DGR system, it'll generally be electric. I don't know if I know enough about the metering to answer your question about whether there'll be separate meters, but I fully expect that we will have tracking of our own electric use, and it'll get paid for by the project. There is a potential for natural gas to be used for the thermal remediation, which is the soil remediation I discussed for plumes A and C. And we won't know that really for sure until we get that work plan approved by KDHE and get contractors involved.
What is the size of plume B in comparison to, say, like a football field or something?
I don't think your mic.
Could you
went on,
repeat
Jerry.
that question?
I'm sorry, I had my mic off. What is the size, like, in comparison of plume B, like, to like a football field, or, I'm not getting the size of.
Yeah, less than a football field for sure. I don't know if I know the exact dimensions off the top of my head, but it's approximately, I think it's approximately 8,000 cubic yards of dirt that will be dug up, and we anticipate, I think, maybe 40% of that has to go to the landfill, if I remember correctly, and then we expect the remainder to be able to be used as backfill.
If you want an answer in square feet, we're guessing about 19,000 square feet.
Thank you.
So I knew it was a number in our specs. I just wasn't sure if I could find it quick enough, but that's it. And Matt, and after we've talked a little bit about the contamination out at the site, could you hit on what has been done out there at a couple of the locations to protect from the soil and the vapors coming within buildings, and, you know, what we see currently that as far as the risk level not being there? Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure. We did an extensive investigation during our remedial investigation on what the conditions are both below buildings and within buildings, industrial buildings, educational buildings, commercial buildings, and residential buildings all around the site. And during that investigation, we found that there weren't any places where we needed to have immediate action to deal with vapors. We still monitor a number of those buildings on an annual basis, and thus far the monitoring has been relatively consistent, so we haven't had to take any actions with respect to vapors. If we had to, the general way that the vapors get removed is they call a sub-slab depressurization system. And think of it as a kind of a vacuum cleaner below the building that pulls those vapors away before they have a chance to go up into the building. And there are a couple of buildings on the campus, or on the site, one at KSU's campus, that have those type of systems installed. And I think they were done more on a proactive basis than necessarily out of data that showed that they were for sure needed to protect the people. But that's the type of system that we would install if we had data that showed that we needed to.
So back to the size question, thanks to the internet, I was able to figure out a football field is 57,600 square feet, so 19,000 is about a third of a football field.
So by looking at the chart here, it's kind of hard to, the timeline. Should the whole system be up and running by first quarter 2027? Is that?
That's our plan, is that we would have all of the other actions completed, and then the DGR system would start up in the first part of 2027.
So 3 years from now.
Mm-hmm.
Matt, you might touch on the design review and approval steps left with KDHE
Sure.
and others.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, each piece of this, we submit to KDHE our design, which they approve before we can get anything started out there. So we have those steps left for the PRB installation, the thermal treatment, and then whatever source area remediation we do, at plumes F and G. With the DGR system, the groundwater remediation system, that one we are submitting a little more often because that is a much more complicated and larger design. So that first design will go into them shortly here, the 30% design, and then we anticipate 100% design in the first part of 2025. Hopefully those all get through KDHE with minimal design comments and minimal back and forth, but there always is the chance that there would be some revisions to the design based on KDHE comments or requirements.
But by way of the corrective action decision, the technology, the techniques, there's a meeting of the minds there. It's really down
Yeah.
to the design details yet to be reviewed.
Correct.
Just my own curiosity, what is the average depth of the groundwater in that area?
It really varies. So we have some places at the site where groundwater is within a few feet, say 6 feet of the surface. And then as you move northeast towards the city, the bedrock dips down, the groundwater area gets thicker, and we have some places where it's maybe 30 feet to the groundwater, and the groundwater can be as much as 100 feet thick.
So the average depth of these wells, I mean, obviously there's miscellaneous types of wells, but are they kind of in that ballpark as far as their depth as well, or is?
Yeah, I think our deepest well is 95 feet, and our shallowest well is probably in the neighborhood of 10 feet.
Thank you.
For example, at Plume B, this was surprising to me, but the shale or the bedrock is 15 to 18 feet below the ground surface. And so in really wet times out in the area, we've had the groundwater be 6-8 feet below the ground. Right now, obviously, it's a little bit drier, but groundwater varies across the area out there, and the shale or the bedrock varies as we move towards the downtown area and the river. So,
Where are the samples sent for testing?
We have a couple of different labs under contract. All of our groundwater and soil samples go to a company called ALS, and their main lab is in Houston, but they have a number of laboratories around the country. And then when we collect air samples to test for the vapor intrusion, those go to a company called Pace Analytical, and both those companies were selected through bid process.
and we have one more lab. Is Beacon the lab that does the vapor?
They do something called passive soil gas.
Okay.
And those are samplers that we're able to put either below a building floor or in the ground to help us locate where we need to do further investigation. We did a lot of that during the high resolution site characterization I mentioned. I don't anticipate there'll be a lot of that going forward.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Commissioners, as you well know, this has been a long process in terms of initial investigation, the public entities coming together. There have been some key players. Tim Rogers is in the room, Greg Bankson as well, as well as Martha Tasker, have been key players to get us to where we are today. And a lot of work behind the scenes, a lot of effort to get to this point. The settlement with the Department of Justice is unique in that we made a decision to accept management responsibility in return for a cash settlement rather than try to go for an annual appropriation through Congress on an ongoing basis as we tried to coerce the federal government into a solution. We chose to take on the management locally, and the team that's presenting to you today, as well as representatives of K-State and USD 305 are the ones that are managing this on an ongoing basis. It feels good to get to this point, have the action item that's on the agenda today to really as kind of culmination of our first step and resolution.
So what year did this issue first come up, and how was it discovered? Little history.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Commissioners, Tim Rogers, Executive Director for the Salina Airport Authority. Everybody turns and looks at me because that's This first started becoming an issue late 90s, and the early work with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers started in the year 2000, and so it has been a long process of going through, and actually at times a very adversarial process. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers kind of wanted to walk away from this site and leave the situation up to the community to take care of. And that's where this unique partnership of four local public entities came together and actually made the decision, and with the governing boards coming together and make a decision to sue the United States of America. It's a very kind of a sobering decision to take that on. But the end result was a $69.5 million settlement. We got, as was described, the settlement, but also the control, the responsibility to administer the project. But I can't think of any other better individuals to manage the project than Matt Schroeder and his Dragon associates at Dragon Corporation, and of course Martha Tasker and her team. We had the secret weapon in executing that, and so it has taken a long period of time. This will say there's other communities that have formerly used defense sites that they look to Salina like many times. How did Salina do that? And they're still struggling with how to do a cleanup for a formerly used defense site from the 1960s or the 1970s. I'd like to add today that this also has been critical, having this solution in place and moving ahead on this process. It's been critical and been essential for the growth and development of the Airport Industrial Center. Projects like the Schwann's expansion, other expansion projects within the Airport Industrial Center with GeoProbe, for example, expansion and new construction on the campus of K-State Salina, the new Aries Center, and a project will probably be announced tomorrow afternoon by U.S. Senator Jerry Moran on the campus. These projects and this capital investment and job creation does not occur without this project being in place and the community taking the lead and to take charge of the cleanup. So appreciate your support for the approval of the funding requests that's on the agenda today, but also that will be coming in the future as these next phases, these next contracts come your way. Be glad to answer any other questions that I may help answer, and thank you for your time today.
Well, thank you for the history lesson.
And I do look to Tim Rogers. In my mind, I can't say it out loud all the time, but he is a groundwater contamination historian, and he knows every nut and bolt and piece of it and what's went on from the beginning. So when it comes to detail, and he's, I would say, an important factor in getting us to where we are today, because he's held everybody together and kept us all marching forward. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you, Martha. Too kind. Thank you.
No, not kind enough. But that's the best I can do.
Well, I have heard previously we got a great team who has worked diligently on this, and it's all coming to where we're going to see dirt moving.
Literally.
Yep.
Literally.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you, Mr. Schroeder, and we will be back.
Thank you for having me.
We'll be back here at 4 o'clock for our regular meeting. Good afternoon. I'll call the March 25th, 2024 meeting of the Salina City Commission to order. I will ask staff if confirmation of the Kansas Open Meetings Act required notice have been properly provided.
Yes.
Thank you. May we have a roll call?
Mayor Longby,
Here.
Commissioner Davis,
Here.
Commissioner Hoppick,
Here.
Commissioner Ivy,
Here.
Commissioner Lankowitz.
Here.
Thank you. May all who are willing and able please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by the shrimp. Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Brings us to awards and proclamations.
Item 3.1, recognition of the month of April 2024 as Child Abuse Prevention Month. Paul Forrester, Executive Director of the Child Advocacy and Parenting Services, Inc., also known as CAPS, will read the proclamation.
Mr. Forrester.
Mayor, Commissioners, thank you for having us here today. Whereas we are living in a time when disclosures of sexual abuse and harassment are becoming mainstream, child sexual abuse still lives in secrecy and shame. And whereas children have a right to be safe and to be provided an opportunity to thrive, learn, and grow, and whereas child abuse and neglect can be prevented by supporting and strengthening Saline County families, thus preventing the far-reaching effects of maltreatment, providing the opportunities for children to develop healthy, trusting family bonds, and consequently building the foundations of communities. And whereas by providing safe, stable, and nurturing relationships for our children, free of violence, abuse, and neglect, we can ensure that Saline County's children will grow to their full potential as the next generation of leaders, helping to secure the future of this state and nation. And whereas there were 1,034 cases of child abuse and neglect investigated by the Department of Children and Families in Saline County in 2023, and whereas Child Advocacy and Parenting Service Incorporated, also known as CAPS, provides both prevention and intervention programs designed to reduce risk factors associated with child abuse and neglect while focusing on educating parents and empowering children. And whereas CAPS conducted forensic interviews for 156 child victims of abuse and neglect and/or witnesses to a violent crime in 2023. Those victims also received professional advocacy, a medical exam, and care by a trained sexual assault nurse examiner on the sexual assault response team, referral to trauma-focused mental health services, and follow-up supports. These services are delivered through a multidisciplinary collaboration between the City of Salina and Saline County Law Enforcement, CAPS, Salina Regional Health Center, Department of Children and Families, Child Protective Custody, Saline County Attorney's Office, Central Kansas Mental Health Center, and private therapists trained to use trauma-focused practices. And whereas CAPS began as a child abuse prevention coalition in 1978, the agency has a vision of a place where every child is safe, healthy, and strong. CAPS hopes to shine a light on abuse to create awareness and increase support through the following public events. Go Blue Salina Denim Days. Businesses encourage employees to wear blue jeans and a royal blue can collect funds for CAPS and spread awareness by taking photos of employees showing their blue support. Each participant will get a sticker to wear showing they believe every child should be safe and loved. Shine a light for survivors. Citizens are encouraged to turn their porches, lamps, or a room in their home blue during the month of April to light the way for child sexual abuse victims and help them shine. Blue light bulbs are available for purchase at CAPS. Pinwheels for Prevention Challenge, a roaming pinwheel garden that is spread via donations from individuals who wish to plant the garden in their yard to show they believe in creating spaces where every child is safe, healthy, and strong. Pinwheel planters are available for businesses to rent for their lobbies or windows, and the information about the gardens and planters can be found at capsofsalina.org. Now therefore be it resolved that I, Bill Longbine, Mayor of City of Salina, do hereby proclaim April 2024 as Child Abuse Prevention Month and encourage our citizens to lift up a child's voice. in witness whereof I hereunto set my hand and cause the seal of the city of Salina, Kansas be affixed this 25th day of March, 2024.
Thank you. Appreciate the work that you and your team do. Do you have any events or public service things going on this?
We do. Also, in addition to the 3 that I mentioned there, we have our annual auction coming up April 5th through the 7th, which is one of our major fundraisers for the year. CAPS is fully financed through grants and private donations, so that's one of our big events of the year that helps us provide all the services that we can for the community. We don't charge any fees for any of our services, so any donations are obviously very welcome.
Yeah, I have seen the signs for the, is that online only, or?
It is online again
That's
this
what I
year.
thought.
We will have on Thursday and Friday, we will have people can come to CAPS and see the items that they'd like to bid on. And so we encourage people to come over and see our facility and visit with us and see what they want to bid on. So.
Okay, thank you. I have a proclamation signed here for you.
Can we have some of the staff come up for the photo?
Yeah, have the staff and the team come up. You get right in front of me, yeah, go ahead. Here, aren't you? Just hold that down there. Thank you. Thank you all for what you do. That'll bring us to item 3.2.
Item 3.2, recognition of the week of April 7th through the 13th, 2024 as National Library Week. Melanie Hedgepeth and Amy Adams, Director and Assistant Director of the Salina Public Library, respectively, will read the proclamation.
Ms. Hedgepeth.
Thank you for your time and the opportunity to have a proclamation today. Whereas libraries offer the opportunity for everyone to connect with others, learn new skills, and pursue their passions, no matter where they are on life's journey. Whereas libraries have long served as trusted institutions, striving to ensure equitable access to information and services for all members of the community, regardless of race, ethnicity, creed, ability, sexual orientation, gender identity, or socioeconomic status. Whereas libraries adapt to the ever-changing needs of their communities, developing and expanding collections, programs, and services that are as diverse as the populations they serve. Whereas libraries are accessible and inclusive places that promote a sense of local connection, advancing understanding, civic engagement, and shared community goals. Whereas libraries play a pivotal role in economic development by providing resources and support for job seekers, entrepreneurs, and small businesses, thus contributing to local prosperity and growth.
Whereas libraries make choices that are good for the environment and make sense economically, creating thriving communities for a better tomorrow. Whereas libraries are treasured institutions that preserve our collective heritage and knowledge, safeguarding both physical and digital resources for present and future generations. Whereas libraries are an essential public good and fundamental institutions in democratic societies, working to improve society, protect the right to education and literacy, and promote the free exchange of information and ideas for all. Whereas libraries, librarians, and library workers are joining library supporters and advocates across the nation to celebrate National Library Week. Now, therefore, be it resolved that I, Bill Longbine, Mayor of City of Salina, proclaim National Library Week, April 7th through 13th, 2024. During this week, I encourage all residents to visit their library and celebrate the adventures and opportunities they unlock for every day.
Thank you. This past 3 months, I have learned a lot about the library, serving on the board, and it does provide a great value for our citizens. And so do you have events coming up for Library Week?
Yes, we do. Allison Walker, our head of fundraising and development, will go over those.
Yes, we have a lot of celebrations and activities, fun stuff going on at the library during National Library Week for our patrons. From Right to Read Day on Monday, where we'll announce some special edition library materials and merchandise that you can get, as well as all the way to the end of the week on Saturday, which is Patron Appreciation Day, where we'll have some extra special goodies at the library that we hope to see you all there to celebrate and see what your library can provide for you.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to bring your staff up? Thank you. Item 3.3.
Item 3.3, recognition of the month of April 2024 as Financial Literacy Month. Rodney Denham, counselor with Consumer Credit Counseling Service, Inc., will read the proclamation.
Mr. Denham.
Good afternoon. So, come on over, Claire. Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. My name is Rodney Denholm, and I'm a counselor with Consumer Credit Counseling Service, and I brought along with me
Claire Ludis, Executive Director for the Salina United Way.
Yes, and we are a funded partner, and one of the main missions of the United Way is financial stability. And nationally, April is considered National Financial Literacy Month. So I have the following, that whereas financial literacy is a critical skill essential for the economic well-being of individuals and communities, and whereas the ability to make informed financial decisions empowers individuals to achieve their financial goals, build wealth, and attain financial stability, and whereas promoting financial literacy fosters a culture of responsible financial behaviors, reduces financial stress, and enhances all overall quality of life. And whereas educating citizens about budgeting, savings, investing, managing debt, and understanding financial products and services equips them with the knowledge and skills needed to navigate an increasingly complex financial landscape. And whereas by raising awareness about the importance of financial literacy and providing resources and support for financial education initiatives, we can empower individuals of all ages and backgrounds to make sound financial choices. Now, therefore, be it resolved that I, Bill Longbine, Mayor of the City of Salina, do hereby designate April 2024 as Financial Literacy Month and urge citizens, educators, financial institutions, community organizations, and government agencies to join us in promoting and participating in activities that enhance financial literacy and empower individuals to achieve financial well-being. In witness whereof, I have hereunto set my hand and caused the seal of the City of Salina, Kansas, to be affixed this 25th day of March, 2024. So, thank you.
Do you have anything to add, Claire?
This week is the last week for our volunteer income tax program. So individuals can get their taxes done at no cost if they make $56,000 or less. So far, since we've opened, we've done 800 returns for individuals in our community. So.
Very good. Well, I can't think of a more important thing for people to learn in these times is making sound financial decisions. So.
Yes.
So. Thank you. Bring us to item 4, public hearings.
Item 4.1, public hearing on an appeal of the denial of conditional use permit number CU24-1 filed by Galab Hamoud on behalf of VIP Smoke Shop.
Mr. Aiken. or Mr. Andrew?
I'm going to start out, and Mr. Aiken will help me. This is a public hearing on an appeal of a conditional use permit application which was denied by the Planning Commission at their February 20th, 2024 meeting. And the applicant in this particular case, Omaha Tobacco Company, entered into an agreement to lease the former Family Video Store, which is at the corner of South 9th and Broadway. And as part of that, they submitted a sign permit application to the city late last year. And in response to that sign permit application, city staff reported to them that their proposed use of the building was not a permitted use, but was a conditional use that first had to be approved by the Planning Commission after conducting a public hearing on the proposed use. And so we worked with Omaha Tobacco Company to get an application prepared and submitted for consideration by the Planning Commission. And so the proposal is to take the now closed Family Video Store and convert it to an electronic cigarette establishment, or otherwise known as a vape shop and tobacco shop that would be named VIP Smoke Shop. They would use the property solely for the operation of retail space to sell CBD-related projects, vaping products, tobacco-related products, and cigars and cigarettes and paraphernalia associated with that. In their application, they stated that they believe the property is in compliance with the city's C5 zoning requirements and the rules and regulations set forth by the state of Kansas on the products that I just mentioned. Their plan was to make some interior renovations to the building, but essentially use it as is. So based on some legislative decisions made by the City Commission in 2014, vape shops and tobacco shops are not listed as conditional uses or as permitted uses in any of the city's zoning districts. And so therefore, if you want to open and operate a tobacco shop or vape shop, that first has to be reviewed and approved as a conditional use permit by the Planning Commission. So we have provided a background report in your packet that just summarizes what has happened since 2014 when those rules were set in place, and there have been 8 conditional use permits that have been approved for these types of shops during that time period, and 1 that was denied. On February 20th of this year, the Planning Commission met and considered the conditional use permit application filed on behalf of VIP Smoke Shop to establish and operate an e-cigarette establishment and tobacco shop at 2018 South 9th. We have provided, again attached to your packet, a report that summarizes the conditional use permit process. And more often than not, the City Commission is not involved in reviewing conditional use permits because the decision by the Planning Commission is generally final unless an applicant is dissatisfied by that decision, in which case they can appeal that decision to the City Commission, or if a sufficient number of neighbors are opposed to the action of the Planning Commission, they can file a protest petition which would come before the City Commission. But more often than not, the Planning Commission makes a decision and it doesn't go forward to the City Commission. In this particular case, the Planning Commission voted 3-2 to deny the conditional use permit application, and they based their decision in the motion on that granting a conditional use permit in this location would not contribute to the welfare of the public, and that granting a conditional use permit in this location would cause injury to surrounding property. So there was also a companion application on the agenda for a similar establishment on Marketplace, and that was the next agenda item following this one, and that application was approved by a vote of 4-1 at the same meeting. The appellant in this case is claiming that the denial of their conditional use permit and approval of the subsequent one at the Planning Commission meeting was unfair because both proposed smoke shops would be selling the same products. Additionally, the location on Marketplace had begun offering their products for sale without approval of a conditional use permit, while in this case, they've not had an opportunity yet to open for business. So because the two cases are somewhat interrelated and are on the same topic, we have provided you with a full transcript of the minutes from that meeting, which is attached to your packet. And so in there you have the discussions and deliberations on both items. And so the applicant, on behalf of VIP Smoke Shop, believes that the denial of their application was unjustified, and our ordinance gives any applicant who's dissatisfied with the Planning Commission's decision the right to appeal that decision to this board. And so we have provided you a summary of some of the information that was provided to the Planning Commission. And so on your previous meeting on the 11th, you set today's date as a hearing to consider all the testimony and evidence and review the record. And so we have provided all that information to you today, and your options at today's meeting are to either review the record and affirm the decision that the Planning Commission made and deny the application, or you can review the record, and if you believe that the record or the basis for decision is not adequate or clear to you, you could return this item to the Planning Commission for further consideration with a statement that summarizes your disagreement with the Planning Commission's decision. I'll let Mr. Bankston expand on this, but if you were to decide to deny the application and affirm the action of the Planning Commission, it would be appropriate to include reasons as the basis for your action. So you could either expand or repeat or reiterate the items cited by the Planning Commission. If this were returned back to the Planning Commission, when it would come back to you for final action, and at that point you would be free to affirm, modify, or overrule the Planning Commission's decision by a favorable vote of a majority of 3 commissioners. So as we have noted, it's important, and we have discussed quite a bit, the difference between when the commission is functioning as a quasi-judicial body where you're applying facts, looking at facts and applying the law to those facts, versus when you're acting in a legislative capacity. So this is one where you are acting as a quasi-judicial body, and making findings and provided reasons is important. And for that reason, the Kansas Open Meetings law does provide an exception that allows bodies, whether it's the Planning Commission or the City Commission, to recess into closed session with the city's legal counsel to assist with preparation of findings and conclusions in support of a quasi-judicial land use decision. So we have provided there on page 7 a possible motion if the commission would want to recess into closed session to deliberate and to try to come up with findings and conclusions. The other thing I would point out as to the subject matter of this topic of the regulation of vape shops and tobacco shops, many communities in Kansas use business licenses or licensing as their means for regulating vape shops. So in the city of Wichita, you have to get a license from the city of Wichita in addition to a state license to operate a vape shop. But we don't have those types of licenses here locally, so in some ways the conditional use permit substitutes for a business license. And so one of the advantages of a conditional use permit is you can put conditions of operation on a conditional use, and if an operator violates those conditions on a repeated basis, then the conditional use permit can be revoked just like a license can be revoked. So that's part of the rationale for why the conditional use permit is used to regulate this particular activity. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Bankston to see if he wants to add to explanation of your role this afternoon and also the option for the closed session.
Thank you, Mr. Andrew. Mr. Andrew has spoken of this distinction between the quasi-judicial function and those functions that you are more commonly engaged in. This is a quasi-judicial proceeding, or as you would expect, it is of the nature of a judicial proceeding. So the analogy to the role of the court or judges and the role of a jury is applicable, if that's helpful. In this case, ordinarily a judge is in the role of determining the applicable law. Well, that has been done for us in that your code dictates what the factors that you are to consider as you deal with this specific question that is before you. Ordinarily, you are either in a legislative role or an administrative role, much like you will be in the balance of your agenda today, where you're dealing with contractual matters and that sort of thing. But an example of the legislative role was when this code was adopted. So that function has occurred. We know that's applicable law. And what makes this a quasi-judicial function was determined by the Kansas Supreme Court in 1979 in the case in which they determined that these zoning matters, where the governing body is taking applicable law and applying it to a particular set of facts represented by in this case, by the proposed location of this business, that when you are in that role, you are applying law to a particular set of facts, thus the quasi-judicial function. Does that prompt any questions, or I can move on if not? Moving on then to the applicable test, in this case, there are 7 conclusions that must be reached before the conditional use permit can be granted. The Planning Commission has provided you with their opinion, and as you know, they determined that they did not believe that 2 of those conclusions could be reached in this particular case. In looking at those conclusions, this is where the not only consideration of the facts, but identification of the factual basis for whether either that conclusion can be reached or cannot be reached is the function that the Planning Commission served in. And as we move on to today's appeal, under the code, your role today is to examine the Planning Commission's decision and determine, first of all, whether or not you believe that determination is to be upheld based upon your review of the record of what the Planning Commission considered. That's the role today. Now, if you concur with the Planning Commission's determination by a majority vote, that concludes the matter and their decision will be upheld. I've suggested to the mayor that very possibly that would be the first question that you would examine is there a motion to concur with the Planning Commission's determination? And as Mr. Andrew referred to, that would be if there are other factual determinations that you wish to include in that determination, that would be your opportunity to make those as well. If a motion is made to that effect and is not sustained by a majority vote, or if such a motion is not made, that then moves you procedurally today to consider what it is you might wish to advise the Planning Commission in terms of why it is you disagree with their conclusion, what other information that you might want them to consider, and as you probably noted, as you consider these conditional use permits, there is also the ability for those to come with certain conditions. At this point in time, because the Planning Commission denied the application, there were no related conditions adopted along with that. If that is something that you want the Planning Commission to look at, again, this would be the opportunity to advise them of that. If you do not choose not to concur with the Planning Commission's decision, then as we just spoke of, that is the opportunity for you to advise them of the basis for your disagreement, what you would want them to consider, and if you want them to consider any conditions. That's the extent of the role today. By code, that must then go back to the Planning Commission. They will then have their opportunity to respond to what you have requested of them. And it is certainly their prerogative to sustain their original determination or to modify it, but ultimately it will come back to you. And when it does, your role is expanded. At that point in time, you are taking everything that has been brought to the table about this particular application. It is then your role to consider all of the factors, make your determination of whatever factual findings you believe to be correct, and then render your ultimate decision. Does the distinction between today's role and that ultimate role, if the matter does go back to the Planning Commission, make sense, or are there any questions about that?
Questions for Mr. Bingston?
That motion would not occur before we had additional information presented and discussion amongst ourselves?
The motion as to whether to concur with the Planning Commission's?
Correct.
Yes,
Okay.
that is correct. My suggestion to the mayor that possibly that be the initial question, whether there is such a motion, would then set the stage for what it is you all need to talk about. The other aspect that, if everyone's clear on this progression as far as today's role, how that could potentially go back to the Planning Commission and then ultimately come back to you all, if that is clear, then I might refer briefly to the closed session option that Mr. Andrew referred to. That is in the Kansas Open Meetings Law. It is different than an executive session. As you know, there's a set of justifications for you to go into an executive session and a certain set of rules associated with that. In this case, it is that closed session option is designed for and limited to when you're in a quasi-judicial function. particularly because you are much like a jury, being expected to arrive at conclusions as to factual determinations that a majority of you must agree upon. That's the key and one of the bases for giving you that opportunity to be able to deliberate in the development of those findings and ultimately the conclusions that a majority of you are of the same mind. There are also often legal implications as you work through those and get to that point. So that's why that option is there. It can be used or not at your discretion, of course. Last point, we speak of these findings of fact. They are the essence of what is the basis for your ultimate decision. Included in your packet was reference to Black's Law Dictionary has a definition of evidence-based findings of fact. That definition begins, evidence to support findings as substantial evidence or such relevant evidence as a reasonable mind might accept as adequate support of a conclusion. So part of this process, of course, is we're not dealing with an evidentiary standard as though we're in a court of law, but we are certainly in an environment where you will want to do your best to be sure that you are dealing with substantial, competent, based evidence as you reach whatever findings of fact lead you to your evaluation of those conclusions that must be made in the context of this type of case. Any questions about any of that?
My question would be a question about timing, similar to Commissioner Davis. If we wanted to recess into closed session, would that be after hearing from the public and also asking questions? Would that be the way you would interpret that?
Yes, that's a very good point.
Okay.
It is designed for you to, after you've heard anything that you're going to hear today, keeping in mind that your primary role today is to keep focused on the record that was before the Planning Commission, because you're really evaluating their decision at this stage. But yes, to your point, that process of deliberation in a closed session is intended to enable you to sort through everything that you will have heard or read in anticipation of the hearing today.
If we take that action, we will close the public hearing.
Yes.
And essentially go in like a jury deliberates.
That's correct.
And come back with the decision.
Yes, your ultimate decision, of course, will be identified and announced here in the public meeting, but it gives you the opportunity to develop that level of consensus that must be developed for the majority to take action.
If I could follow up to that then, if there was split opinion, would there be an opportunity to discuss both sides of the opinion in open session before? Because we obviously can't take a binding vote, I would assume, anywhere other than up here. But there may be a majority opinion and a minority opinion.
We would need to take a vote whether to recess or not, correct?
Yes, that is your prerogative as to whether you would find that useful to be able to have those deliberations in a closed session.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Bingston?
Yeah, I don't know if there's more staff.
Well, I was just
presentation
going to
anticipated.
call to their attention it's a fairly healthy size packet, but just for your benefit, you have the appeal petition that was filed by the Salina VIP Smokes. You have their original application and staff report. We provided an attachment that shows the factors that are supposed to be considered by the Planning Commission in any type of conditional use permit application. We have written comments that we received from a property owner on Highland, having provided notice to neighboring property owners. We got written comments back from the Bennett's at 2012 Highland. That's included in your packet. Vicinity maps that show the location and what's around it. And then the signage package that was submitted. And then we have a verbatim transcript of the two conditional use permit applications that were heard back to back at the Planning Commission meeting. So I was just going to do two things. One, pause to see if there's any questions about what was included in the packet by staff. And then a reminder that this was set up to be a public hearing, and we do have representatives of VIP Smoke Shop here who may want to address the commission. So.
Did Mr. Aiken have anything to add?
Mayor, if I may, real briefly, the question that Mr. Scragg wanted to make sure we made or pointed out was that the or factor in the third conclusion. I didn't know if that was something.
In the third of the factors that are listed in there, there is a one of the considerations is whether a use contributes to the welfare or convenience of the public, and on occasion staff and others have merged those together as if they're one, as welfare and convenience, but the actual verbiage is welfare or convenience. So we wanted to point out that you could have a use or a location where a reviewing body could believe that the public welfare wasn't met, but the public convenience was. And so we're going to call attention that under factor B that it is welfare or convenience, not welfare and convenience.
And what page are you on with that?
Well, it appears in the staff report on page 4 under B. It says that the proposed conditional use at the specified location will contribute to and promote the welfare or convenience of the public. And so we have pointed out that you could have a situation where you could conclude that the use would not contribute to the public welfare, but you could still conclude that it would contribute to public convenience at that location. So the reviewing bodies, whether it's the City Commission or Planning Commission, don't need to conclude that it promotes both the public welfare and the public convenience. It could be one or the other for that criteria to be met.
Any questions for Mr. Andrew?
It's not about the information that you've given. I'm just curious. Do you know if in Wichita, in addition to the business license, are there any subsequent zoning or location restrictions on where that business can be located?
No, they simply have a local license and a local inspection program, and the reason they have a local license is if there are issues with sales to minors or other things, that licensing gives them the authority to revoke a license if the conditions aren't adhered to. And since we don't have a license, we use the conditional use permit as serving the same function.
Okay, thank you.
Is there a state license required?
There is a state license that's required, and there are state laws. When we started doing this in 2014-15, I believe it was only in the last several years that the legislature increased. When first started in 2014, there were no age limits on vaping. Then it was 18, and then the legislature amended it and increased the age to 21 for purchase or entering a store. So it's now on par with tobacco at age 21.
Thank you.
So, if you have no other questions, I do know there's representatives of VIP Smoke Shop here. So.
Would the applicant like to address the commission? Please state your name.
Yes, my name is Galab Hamoud. It was my honor to stand before you just to explain the reasons for this appeal. So the first reason is on the day of the hearing of the 20th of April, we get informed and confirmed and agreed that the property is complying with the zoning regulation and laws. Also, that there's any objections from any of the parties that concerned. However, it's still rejected based on health reasons, which these reasons didn't apply on the other case that came after that, and they get approved too. And we gonna sell the same products anyway. And as known here that there's 11 stores already in the city, all around the city. The closest one is only 2 minutes away. If you, I can give you photos of the map that's showing it's only in the same zoning area, if that's possible. May I? Show you a draft?
I think we have that in the packet, don't we?
That's
Go ahead and give it to the clerk.
We already leased this property almost a year ago. Spending a lot of expensive, you want to take out. The startup cost is already reaching $255,000, and I feel that it's not unfair that you are approving already 11 stores in the same city, and you judge me and deny my store to be open based on health issues, while the FDA agreed and approved to selling this kind of products based on hundreds of researches. And they approved the manufacturers producing this kind of products. And I'm the only one who got denied because of health reasons. I feel it's not unfair, so I'm here in front of you, Justice, to see what's your decision. I hope that it will be approved. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor, if I may.
Yes.
Just to be sure, as we've spoken of, your focus, of course, needs to be on the information considered by the Planning Commission. I wonder if possibly would it be helpful if staff had an opportunity to examine the document that you were just provided. I couldn't assess quickly enough whether that's of the nature of information that would have been available to the Planning Commission or not, and I don't know if planning staff wants to try to make that evaluation or how we should approach that.
Well, we pulled it out separately as a background report in your packet, but in the background report we provided you with a list of every vape shop that has been approved since 2014, its location, what it's zoned, and the date it was approved. And we also provided that same information to the Planning Commission, providing them a listing chronologically of the applications that had been considered by the Planning Commission since the legislation was adopted in 2014. So the locations and the zoning classification of the other vape shop locations that had been before the Planning Commission was provided to the Planning Commission and is also provided in our background report here, so I don't think the map conveys any information that hasn't already been exposed to the two bodies.
Mr. Andrew, while you're there, the staff report elaborates on the criteria that the Planning Commission felt weren't met, one of those being the health and welfare, the other being impact on property values. I don't know that that came out in the verbal report. I just encourage you to touch on that, and then also to be sure to give the applicant the opportunity to respond.
And it comes across, maybe not so clearly if you watch the video of the meeting, it comes across better than perhaps in writing, but one of the Planning Commission members cited studies that he had read independently and before the meeting, citing some studies that showed that a concentration of vape shops would migrate towards lower income areas and also would be inclined to lower the value of surrounding properties. And so they took the conclusions from that study that they had read independently and used that as a basis for their reasoning on the relationship of vape shops to impact on property values. So the finding there, the second finding as it relates to injury to surrounding property, had to do with the valuation on properties, and there was also a reference to proximity to schools, which was also mentioned by the Bennetts. But the injury to property was primarily focused on property values, at least as staff understood it at the meeting.
Just want to make sure that the applicant has an opportunity to respond to that second point as well, if they wish, before we move on.
The main issue here is the second case after me has the same situation, property, and we're gonna sell the same products as well. So these researches and health reasons apply it on me, and it doesn't apply to others, and that's what it makes me feel is injustice. So that's all.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Is there any public comment? Anybody online?
Technically, I think we rolled into the public hearing, but you might want, I'm not sure we had you declare the public hearing truly open, so.
Oh.
That may be our oversight on staff's part, but you might
Nicole,
go ahead and declare the meeting, the public hearing open.
the public hearing is open. And is there any public comment on this issue? Seeing none. I will bring it back to the commission. If there are action
I have
that we would like to take or more
I have
questions?
several questions that I believe would be advantageous if we moved into a closed session. So I'm not sure how long I want to do this, because whatever we do is never long enough. But I'm going to, Mayor Longbine, I move that the City Commission recess into a closed session for 20 minutes pursuant to KSA 75-4318 G1 for the purpose of deliberating on matters relating to its decision in the pending conditional use appeal as a quasi-judicial function. The regular meeting will resume in this room at 5:15.
I'll second that.
Discussion, question. There will be an opportunity for open discussion after that meeting. Is there any expectation that all of our discussion is going to occur in that meeting and not here publicly?
I think we would come out of that meeting with a direction. And
That's my concern exactly.
So just to be
I think
clear,
there's some things that need to be said in the open session that I don't want hidden in that room.
So
And, go ahead.
I think there's a legal question of what must be disclosed, and then there's a preferential or a stylistic question of what you as the governing body might wish to discuss in open session. And that's a precursor for me to put legal counsel on the spot and ask him to tell you from a purely legal perspective whether you could deliberate solely in closed session and then come out and make your decision.
You certainly could. The matter of, well, I think to the mayor's point, the matter of what is to be reported on beyond the ultimate determination is a matter to be determined among you, if that makes sense.
Is it in executive session, there's more of a prohibition about disclosure of what's in executive session?
Well, it's most commonly, well, short answer, yes. There is generally the attorney-client privilege to be preserved, and in other cases, the general interests of the city to be preserved. Here, it is somewhat different. It's not that there is preclusion of, for lack of a better term, the minority report. I would have to say that one of the things that I would have to be watchful for is making sure that the content of any such report does not undermine the basis of the majority position. I think it's certainly the prerogative of anyone in the minority to report if he or she, or if he chooses, but we would have to be careful to be sure that that didn't undermine the majority position.
And
It just seems though our deliberation, which would typically occur in open session, would then occur in that room, which then deprives
part of
public
my,
of hearing our
yeah,
deliberation.
part of my concern is we're to follow what was presented at the Planning Commission. To me, there's a couple gray areas here that I believe I need direction from legal counsel to whether it's taken into consideration in making the decision. That's one of the reasons for myself wanting to go into to closed session.
For that, I would rather just go into a regular executive session, get the legal part settled, and then come out here and actually give our opinions and deliberate.
yes, that was my question. Would council and staff be included in the closed session?
That again is your prerogative, but it would normally, to the extent that staff or legal counsel can assist you in developing your findings and conclusions, we're there to assist or not, depending on the commission's wish. To the earlier point, it could very well be that this initial conversation that Commissioner Hoppeck is referring to is possibly more appropriately an attorney-client privileged discussion. We would have to be sure that it was limited to an exchange that involved the providing legal advice for that to be justified, but that could possibly address those questions in a way that you could then more openly discuss the matter.
I guess mine is nothing keeps us from going into closed session and discussing this and coming back out and basically having that same discussion, correct? Once we know, or
if it involves a need for legal advice, as a precursor to ultimately developing findings, I do think it would be the better course to go in on the basis of the attorney-client privilege to try to address those. And there's an element there of potentially discussing, hopefully with answers to those questions, you all can better address how you wish to proceed.
And as cumbersome as it may be, you can go into executive session, limit your conversation to that, return to open session, and then if you decide you want to go back in to additional executive session or closed session, you could reconvene a second or a third time.
Do we have language available for an executive session if that's? Didn't see that
Not
one
at
coming,
hand.
did you?
I'm sorry.
Should have.
Yeah, we should have.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on the floor. Do we need to address that before we go into?
We could withdraw that motion pending.
How do you want us to handle that?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't know that it was seconded, but.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was.
Commissioner
Okay.
Linkwood
I'm
seconded
sorry,
that.
I didn't hear that.
And do we need to clarify who's going to be in attendance?
Yeah, but we
That would be
need to
best,
get out
yeah.
of the close, if we're not gonna go into closed session, we need to reverse. So how do you suggest we do that?
You could vote it, you could either withdraw the motion or you could vote the motion down. By Robert's Rules of Order, with the consent of the person that seconded the motion, you could withdraw the motion.
Okay, I withdraw my motion to move into closed session at this time.
Consent.
Okay, motion and a second to withdraw. A motion to go into closed session has been made. Do we need to vote on that? We never voted before.
No.
No, I think
No, we
with
just
the withdrawal
approved
of the
it,
motion
Okay,
and the second.
We will stay in open session.
Mayor and Commissioners, if you look to your agenda today, the attorney-client privilege elements of the required motion are present. If you look to where it begins or refers to the subject, that would instead refer to confidential legal considerations relating to the pending conditional use permit appeal.
Confidential legal.
Yeah, you would, the same language up to confidential legal considerations relating to, in this case, it would be the pending conditional use permit appeal, and then pick up again based on the need for consultation with an attorney for the public body.
Okay, let me see if I have this. Do we want to try 20 minutes? We think that'll be enough?
Or
Sounds like the magic
Here we
number,
go.
okay.
shorter? You have the major questions. If you think
Well,
you
I'm
need-
sure some others will come up once we get started. I have faith in you. I'm usually the quiet one. Okay, Mayor Longbine, I move that we move to recess into executive session for 20 minutes to discuss with legal counsel the subject of confidential legal considerations relating to the appeal of the denial of conditional use permit CU24-1 filed by Galeb Hamad on behalf of VIP Smoke Shop, based upon the need for consultation with an attorney for the public body, which would be deemed privilege in the attorney-client relationship pursuant to KSA 75-4319B2. The open meeting will resume in this room at 5:25.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to recess into executive session for 20 minutes on the subject of an appeal from the, we will resume in this room at 5:25. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Nay. Motion carries 4-1.
So, Mayor and Commission, in light of my understanding of the intended topic of conversation, it's my suggestion that attendees, in addition to yourselves, include myself, City Legal Counsel, Deputy City Manager Jacob Wood, Assistant City Manager Sean Hennessy, and at the moment, not planning staff, since we won't be deliberating on findings. The other thing that I would note is, in the event that we finish the conversation early, we can adjourn from the executive session, return to this room, and just not pick up your public meeting until the appointed time.
Okay. We'll see you at 5:25. Okay, we are back in open session. Is there a motion whether or not to affirm the decision of the Planning Commission and deny the application? I hear none. Is there a motion to return this application to the Planning Commission for further considerations?
So moved. You said to return? You asked if there was a motion to return it to the Planning Commission?
You need to make the motion first.
Oh, I'm sorry, okay. I would move to,
Before we do that, I think we need to, yeah, I think before we move to do something like that, we need to discuss the reasons we would return it to the Planning Commission.
That's, you're all making good points, I think. I'm looking to Mr. Scragg to see the threshold question. You've answered the question as to whether you, by every indication, choose not to concur with the Planning Commission's determination. You can, I think, approach this in as two questions or a single motion, depending on how you wish to go. If you were to approve the motion, as I understood, that was just made, then if that is sustained, you would still have the obligation to determine what explanation, what bases, what questions, any communication you might then wish to make to the Planning Commission as you return it to them. So I think that could be developed either as two separate motions or one, if you'd rather deliberate before you attempt to structure that motion.
Would we like to modify the motion and discuss this? Or?
well, the motion as it stands now would have to end up being amended anyway to include those questions. And it hasn't been seconded yet, or has it?
Correct.
So we could, I don't mind discussing first, we just need a secretary to write down all of our questions. Okay. Well, and I just want to preface my remarks. Anyone who's known me for a long time knows that my position on tobacco products. Proud to work hard for the first clean indoor air ordinance in Salina, which was actually the first in the state of Kansas, and we eventually got a statewide ordinance. But our role up here today is not to decide if I like tobacco shops. It's to determine if the Planning Commission followed its own rules and was fair in the way it considered the facts that were brought in front of it. I do have some questions that I would like to get some answers to. The first is related to, excuse me, the conditional use contributing to and promoting the welfare or convenience of the public. That is an or rather than an and. The welfare part, I'd like to know how welfare is defined. Is there some standard? There's this a priori assumption that certain types of businesses on that Lulu list are undesirable, and aside from our own personal decisions, that's a list. I don't know if it's scientifically constructed, legally constructed, but if tobacco is not good for welfare, then alcohol is not good for welfare. So if we're looking at whether these are all legal substances, but we're not arguing whether those should be eliminated and made illegal, but we're discussing where they can be sold. So we'd like get a little more definition of welfare. And as far as the convenience, there's probably no more convenient site. I mean, if convenience is taken literally, just can you drive in, park, and drive out? I mean, it does meet the convenience determination. I'd like to know what basis injury to property values is being considered. This is a rather isolated piece of property. that's already around a lot of noise and other businesses. The issue of similar businesses being close by needs to be addressed. Same business, same neighborhood, these tend to be clustered in certain parts of town. In most cities, they get placed in places where people don't object. And you can read into that whatever you want. But it's a legal substance, and you look at other types of products that other people don't consider. We just need to be consistent in the way that we address them. The health issue was brought up by one of the planning commissioners, and I think one of them brought up an article that was pro-health and one was anti-health, and that shows you really where the medical literature is now. Most substances have a few unique benefits. Most products have many deleterious adverse effects. But again, we're not settling the state issue of are these safe substances. We're trying to decide if this issue was handled consistently by or appropriately by the Planning Commission. And it's kind of hard to see this from a perspective that is not going to be taken by the applicant as discriminatory. I don't know who the other applicant is, which makes it easier to say this. But he's applying for the same type business, close to where someone else applied for the same type business on the same day, and that person was awarded the conditional use permit. So I'd like to know how that is considered a consistent application of their thought processing. I'll stop there so I don't ramble.
Yeah, I think as we look at the reason for sending this back to the Planning Commission would be, I think I heard the word from Commissioner Davis several times, is consistency. I would ask that the Planning Commission review why this property is in a C5 district and was not approved in other vape shops or like retail stores, I'll call it, were approved in C5 districts. The products being offered in this store seem to be consistent with those that were also available in other retail stores in C5 district. And I guess why does this property, to follow up with Commissioner Davis's comments, why does this property affect properties around it in a negative way such that other shops, retail shops like this, have not, or we have not heard of them affecting other values? So I think the consistency of what's been done in the past with what's being done here is probably my biggest concern, and those are the things that I think the Planning Commission needs to look at.
Further discussion?
I just want to say one thing. It has nothing to do with these issues specifically, but when they're products that some of us may not like for whatever reason, we have to remember businesses succeed because of demand. And let's not use this example, but alcohol. Until we address the reasons people drink, we're going to keep having lots and lots of liquor stores. All right, or you can substitute any business or product that you may find distasteful, but they exist because there's a need. And if it's something that you don't like, you really have to dig deep and find out. So it goes way beyond just what type of a store is it, but that's a question for another day. But I just want to ensure that we, as a city, are known to conduct our business in a very fair method.
If there's no further discussion, I would assume we need to close the public hearing before we vote.
It would be suitable to close the public hearing at whatever point in time you're confident that there would be no further need for public input. So,
Okay. Any further discussion? I will close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission.
So.
Hoping our secretary can report.
In an effort to take notes as you were speaking and try to summarize it, I think what I'm hearing is that you want to communicate to the planning commission.
Oh, Mike's here in a minute.
Oh, sorry. I can't see the light whether it's on or off. I apologize. So what I think I heard you say is expressing an expectation that we all, the planning commission and the city, are deliberate in our application of the standards to like applicants, and that would mean a demonstration that a denied applicant is sufficiently unique from the others as it relates to impacts on adjoining property values or adjacent property values, impacts on welfare and convenience, noting that the criteria is welfare or convenience, not welfare and convenience, which is a notable distinction. So if I try to reiterate that for you one more time, you're identifying it as a priority for deliberations, that we apply ourselves consistently for like applicants, and in the event that they're recommending denial of an applicant, you'd like them to demonstrate or communicate to you how that denied applicant is sufficiently unique from similar applicants on the communicated basis of impacts on adjoining property values, impacts on welfare, impacts on convenience.
Could not have said it better. In fact, I did not say it better.
Give me 3 more tries. I might be able to get better, but I think that's encapsulating what I heard you say.
Yes. Yep. Sounds good to me. Yeah.
So we had a motion on the floor.
Yes, with those as the additional information we would like the planning commission to address.
Okay.
Second?
Okay, we have a motion and a second to return this application to the planning commission for further consideration with notations made to apply consistency in reasoning for their denial of this business versus other like businesses. All in favor, say aye.
Mayor, if I'm sorry.
Yes.
A little slow to the punch, but if it's helpful, I think the direction to the Planning Commission could certainly be developed by Planning Commission staff based upon a transcription of the considerations as Mr. Scragg articulated them. If that was that what you were
if that's acceptable, we can
if that's
transcribe
helpful
that into
for the commissioners to know that that message as articulated is what would be transcribed and delivered.
Okay.
If that's your wish.
So we will articulate what has been discussed to the planning commission. And we did vote here. I didn't catch.
No, we haven't voted yet.
We paused you right as
I'm
you were
sorry.
getting ready to vote.
I apologize for interrupting. I just wanted to make sure that everyone was on this, literally on the same page. But
And I don't know if I got my vote in.
yeah,
I think you paused as you were calling the vote, so now would be the time.
We want to vote again?
I haven't voted.
You already voted.
I haven't voted, no.
Oh,
We
you
haven't
did?
voted, I
Okay.
don't think. Call for, yeah, I think we need to
Okay.
call for the vote.
All in favor of the motion on the floor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. This will go back to the planning commission. That will bring us to the consent agenda.
Item 5.1, approve the minutes of the meeting of March 11th, 2024. Item 5.2, approve the minutes of the special meeting of March 18th, 2024. Item 5.3, approve resolution number 24-8195, appointing a member to the Law Enforcement Citizen Review Board. Item 5.4, award the bid for project number 24020, cleaning the downtown water treatment plant South Lime Lagoon to Pumphrey Trucking LLC in the amount of $3.50 per cubic yard and an annual payment of $140,000 for the year 2024, and authorize the city manager to execute an agreement with Pumphrey Trucking LLC upon fulfillment of all prerequisites under the bid documents. Item 5.5, award the bid for the former Schilling Air Force Base site project number FSAFB 24-100, remediation of plume B soil source area to T&R Construction in the amount of $320,146 with a 10% construction contingency for a total project authorization not to exceed $352,160, and authorize the city manager to execute an agreement with T&R Construction upon fulfillment of all prerequisites under the bid documents. And item 5.6, authorize the city manager to enter into an assignment agreement assigning the rights and obligations conveyed to S&B Motels, Inc. in a Community Improvement District Development Agreement dated September 14th, 2015 to Premium Hospitality, LLC.
Thank you. Is there any public comment on the consent agenda? Please come forward, state your name.
My name is Dale Cope from Crop Service Center at Abilene, and I promise I won't take as much time as the last line. But we have been in the Lime Lagoon treatment plant for 37 years, and we spent the first 30 years in a liquid form. We pulled out about 5,000 ton a year, which is about 150,000 at no cost to the city. And then there was an agreement, which I agree with, that wanted to go expedite to get the one Lime Lagoon completely cleaned out, and then because we were hardly keeping up, and we had a bid process. We won that bid at that time, and I think we won it by over $100,000 at that time, savings to the city. Our lime, this lime that you have, mostly stays in the general area and serves the general public in this area, and I would like you to, you to consider that as a benefit to having us clean out the pits. I think we've gone 37 years now with, to my knowledge, not a complaint in getting that taken care of, and we've got a track history. I think you could accept our bid with confidence that it would continue that way and get cleaned out. I would like you to consider that as you go along. Your contract is very well written. I'm not sure who wrote it, that it allows you to deny or accept any bids that come along and for any reason that you want to. And I'd like you to consider our location, the boots on the ground in our sales force. We spread this lime as precisely as possible. About 80% of it goes on in a variable rate manner, where we test each field in 2.5 acre grids, and then it's applied accordingly in a variable rate. Some sides field don't need any, some sides need quite a bit. So we're doing the best we can with that lime. I think we're taking it to its fullest extent in this area, and I'd like you to consider that before you accept just the low bid. I think it's 23 cents difference per yard. That's what it is. So thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Any further comments? Would you like to follow up on that, Ms. Tasker?
And as Mr. Cope said, he's been involved out at the water treatment plant Lagoon for many, many years, and the first several years just couldn't keep up with what we were producing, so it was time to start a little more rapid cleaning process, and that's when we bid the last project in 2016, which we just finished the North Lagoon last year. And we finished at that time at about $3.93 a cubic yard for the removal. And as we talked about being financially sound, and following our purchasing policy, have somewhat of an obligation to go out and look for the best cost for the city. And I did have other contractors that contacted me that were interested in doing this, that do this same work. So based on that, went out for a competitive bid. And as you looked in the packet, the bids were very close, from $3.50 to $3.80 a cubic yard. So obviously they've all understand the value of the product and taken it out to the field for land application. So basically, we followed the bid process and the purchasing policy, and I spent several conversations with staff at Beloit, where Pumphrey Trucking is currently working on a project for them and just finishing that up. It was roughly 45,000 cubic yards of lime residual being used for beneficial use on property. And so I'll make that much of a statement, and then if you have additional questions, I'll try to answer those specifically.
Okay, thank you.
And I do believe Mr. Pumphrey is here from Pumphrey Trucking, if he'd like to make any comments. Andrew?
So,
He's here.
Martha, while you're there, as one clarification, the competitive bid process actually caused our unit price to go down, correct?
Yes, it did. We finished in 2023. I breezed that pretty quickly at $3.93 a cubic yard, and by the competitive bid, the low bid was $3.50. And again, the work that Crop Services did for us was, without a doubt, it was good work. But the reports I got from Beloit on the work Pumphrey Trucking is doing was similar, very professional, and did everything they could and some extra things to make their process easier and better for them. So that catch what you're after, Mike?
Thank you. Yep.
Is there this or any other item a commissioner would like to remove from the consent agenda? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion for approval.
Mayor, move approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0. Brings us to administration.
Item 6.1, consider awarding contracts to Fox Lawn and Landscaping LLC for right-of-way mowing, detention pond mowing, and Centennial ditch mowing.
Mr. Kowak.
Evening, Mayor and Commissioners. Jim Kowach, Operations Manager for Public Works here in Salina. It's one staff report, but it's actually 3 different items that are contracts we're asking for your approval on tonight or your consideration, and then also whether or not to award an ad alternate to one of the contracts. The item before you tonight is for the mowing of city property. The first contract is right-of-way, and it's the abbreviation's ROW in a lot of the paperwork, but it stands for right-of-way, which typically includes ditches, medians, those kinds of things, overpasses. The second one is the detention ponds, which we have 7 detention ponds, stormwater detention ponds around town that need to be mowed and maintained. And then also we have the new Centennial ditch project, which is at the very southwest corner of town. We recently had a tree clearing project in the old Dry Creek Channel, major drainage improvement for the whole airport authority. And now that that's been the trees have been removed and the flow line has been reestablished, we want to make sure that that doesn't get overgrown again. So we've got a contract to mow that 3 times a year. The right-of-way contract, we do have an ad alternate in there that in previous years, a portion of the right-of-way contract was mowed on a weekly basis, and some of it was mowed on a biweekly basis. And the ad alternate is for your consideration of mowing that right-of-way biweekly stuff on a weekly basis to improve the performance and appearance of the property. Just briefly, we've had to mow, or we've mowed these properties by contract for the last several years. It's something that the street staff and the park staff don't have the equipment to do it. We haven't done it for years. It's been outsourced. It includes streets, medians, the detention pond, the North Ohio overpass, which is one of the gateways to the city. They're typically let in 3-year contracts, and then we've had an option for a 3-year renewal. To keep prices at market, we've included an annual inflation factor based on the Midwest, a Midwest index to keep it current with increasing prices, but it is capped at 3%. It has a 3% cap annually. So we've, in the past, let these 3-year contracts and renewed them annually, and then had the opportunity to renew for another 3-year contract. The previous contract, the contractor that was performing the work, which is Fox Lawn and Landscaping, declined to renew his 3-year contract. He basically said he couldn't afford to do that work at that price anymore. So we went out to bids. We had lots of input into our mowing contract ever since COVID, I think, is when it really became an issue with the appearance and a combination of just the specifications that we had put together, the frequency in which we were requiring it to be mowed, and some of it is just Salina's wet weather. And the fact that, you know, most of the city is very, very flat. The bottom of the ditches are flat. They hold water, and when there's water in them, you can't mow them, but the grass keeps growing. And when you mow wet grass, it doesn't look very good. So we've got these kind of competing interests. We want it to look like a lawn, but we really can't take care of it like a lawn unless we mow it on a weekly basis. So we've had some performance issues with the contract in the past, meeting expectations as far as what city property should look like after it's been mowed. And I've listed several of the streets here in the staff report that are major thoroughfares in the city that we're only getting mowed twice a week, or every other week. Like I said, we had Fox Lawn and Landscaping as the previous contractor. Fox Lawn and Landscaping was the low bid on all 3 of the contracts. We did have a second bidder on the right-of-way contract that was very competitive and qualified, but because of the cost and the acceptable performance by Fox Lawn and Landscaping in the past, we are recommending award to them in this cycle as well. We've also, as far as just the performance of our mowing contract, we started off last fall and said, how could we make this mowing contract better? And we asked our continuous process improvement team group here of Greenbelts in the city to take a look at our contract process. And we had them look at ways to improve the performance or ways to improve the specifications so that we got a level of service that we wanted with the city. It took a while for that group to evaluate our current contract, for us to go back and forth on which of their recommendations should be made a part of the contract, and then we finally got agreement on that and put the mowing contract out to bid in February, which is a month later than we wanted to. It's hard to imagine today because it might snow tonight, but spring is here, and we are going to have to start mowing in a couple weeks. So we are kind of under a crunch as far as making a decision and getting a contract in place to start mowing and not being behind again this year. The wet weather that causes a contractor on a mowing contract to fall behind, and then once they fell behind, then it starts looking bad as far as windrows or clumpiness. We've addressed that in our new contract as far as that expectation is that they don't get paid until it looks nice, it's a level surface, and the clumps and windrows aren't there. They have to mow it again, or they have to remove it or bag it or improve the performance. We have the ad alternate, which requires mowing every week instead of every other week. And then we're a little late this year, but actually we've increased the season, what we consider our mowing season, to earlier in the year and later in the year, because we've actually had things looking pretty shabby by the end of March before. So rather than April 15th, we moved it up to where it's April through November, or November 15th as far as the frequency, so 36 times a year for weekly mowing. Cutting Edge Handyman Service was the second low bidder. Fox Landscaping was the low bidder on the right-of-way contract. The total for those on the biweekly, the base bid plus the biweekly for Fox Landscaping was $207,090 for the right-of-way contract, and it's $265,140 for the weekly mowing. You combine that with the only bid or the low bid for the detention ponds at $15,823.80, and Centennial Ditch annual bid of $2,861.37. Gives you grand totals for all three contracts of $225,775.17 for mowing it with the biweekly option, or $283,825.13. So considerably more than what we have been paying. The previous contract, just to put things in perspective, Fox Lawn and Landscaping bid the previous contract, which did include several more utility locations, for a total of $97,873. That was 3 years ago. You'll note that the other two bidders on that same project were substantially higher. So we have been getting, we think, a very good deal for a long time. But we don't know that that necessarily reflected the cost of actually doing that work. We do think the market value is much higher, taking into account the cost of fuel, the inflation that we've seen, and the cost of labor, the cost of equipment to perform this, and just the variety of equipment. All of these ditches and all of these neighborhood areas and these ponds require, some require bigger mowers, some require push mowers, some require ride-on mowers. They need to weed eat and broom several of these areas on a weekly basis, so there's a lot more labor to it than where we were just mowing every 2 weeks or once a month. There is a lot of detail in here in the staff report about how we used to do part of this in-house, but we've never done all of it in-house. And it's too late this year. Even if we wanted to, we can't. We don't have the people, we don't have the equipment, we don't have the vehicles to try to do it. And quite honestly, I don't know if we could do it for the price that they've quoted us. If that's a direction we want to consider in the future, and we are going to look at it closer, but this year, to keep the city neat and clean, we are recommending that you award the low bid for the weekly contract. The problem is, and the big problem is we've taken part of this contract, the utility locations, out of it, and that will be bid separately here in another couple weeks. It was actually advertised today. And we budgeted for this based on a 3% increase of those very low prices we got 3 years ago. So there is a significant shortfall between what we budgeted this year to mow and what it's going to actually cost us. And those numbers are included in here, but the shortfall for biweekly mowing is $152,306.17. The shortfall for mowing it on a weekly basis is $210,456.13. We understand that's a lot of money, but we've had a lot of input from commissioners, residents, property owners that they expect the city to look neat and clean. And the city actually enforces these mowing regulations against property owners and have the right to force a lien on their house or do the work and force a lien on their house if they don't comply. And it seems kind of hypocritical if we don't follow our own rules. That if we want it to look neat and clean, this is what it's going to cost us. That's what the market is bearing right now. You do have some options as far as the contracts that are listed here. The right-of-way contract is the big one. You can choose to award it on a biweekly basis for $225,775.17 to Fox Lawn and Landscaping. You can choose to award it on a weekly basis for $265,000 or $265,140, or you can reject us or amend those contracts. You can choose to award the Detention pond contract to Fox Lawn and Landscaping for $15,823.76, or authorize it with amendments. And then actually the significant, or this, I think we're getting an excellent deal on the Centennial Ditch Project to mow it 3 times a year to eliminate any brush or trees from establishing themselves for $2,861.37. The one thing I do need to mention is, since it is so late in the year in the budget cycle, we are going to try to make up within our current budgets the shortfall. The ability to do that a third of the way through the year, and with all of the other unknowns for the rest of this year, we don't know. The finance director said that in the event of other savings are not sufficient to cover the overage, the fund balance would be used, and a budget amendment would need to be made at the end of the budget year. In future years, staff is would look to use a sales tax allocation from parks and street maintenance to pay for these ongoing costs. So this is something that will be as much next year, or considering inflation, up to 3% more. But we tried to make the mowing contract more responsive, tried to make it provide the service levels that we all expect, and for the city to be neat and clean. And with that, I'll stand for any questions.
And maybe I'm just not following the numbers, but in the blue sheet, page 5, there's in that first full paragraph, the total of it was 283,000, and then down in the options, it's 265,000. Which?
It's 265,000 for the right-of-way contract, but then if you add 15,000 for the detention ponds and 3,700 for the Centennial ditch, that's how you get the 283,000.
So we're not considering that
There are
now?
3 different contracts, so you need to
can bring
consider
those
them
back later.
individually.
Those are the ones
The first one would be the right-of-way
Okay, you
contract
did say that
for
earlier.
either
I'm
weekly or
sorry.
bi-weekly, and then the second would be for detention ponds. And
I
then,
got to turn the page over.
Yeah, okay.
I'd
Well,
seen that before. Okay.
Well, there's a lot of numbers in here. I apologize.
All right, thank you. And actually, we weren't so much as surprised by this as we've gotten away with not having to pay. Can we look at the other 2 bids 3 years ago? It's about
Well, in the
what
cycle
this is
before
now,
that was
yeah.
real similar. That we've had good performance at a reasonable cost for a long time.
Yeah, but I think the point you're making is, when we bid it the last time, 2 out of those 3 bids were in the general price
Exactly,
range that we
just
now
right.
find.
Yeah, we
this
questioned
bid.
that 3 years ago, if that was a mistake, and I think staff had gone back and verified it because there was such a gap between the 3 bids we received 3 years
But we're where
ago.
we should be.
Yeah.
Well, and if it helps at all, part of the analysis that we did with respect to bringing it in-house, a quick comparison that we ran was, this is 50 locations ranging in size from 460 square feet to 1.2 million square feet, being mowed weekly. That's 150 acres. At a week, accounting for the weekly cost, that's $61.28 an acre. So that was helpful for me to try to put into perspective, what price range are we in if we tried to get the equipment? Seasonal employees, I'm not sure our difficulty has been seasonal employees all along, but on the premise that you could hire seasonal employees and dedicate them to this, we're paying $61.28 an acre to have it mowed.
Do you have an idea what percentage is mowed by city staff and how much is contracted? So I think the public perception is the city does it all.
Well, the Public Works Department, honestly, we mow the levee and we have 1 mower. But Public Works doesn't mow very much at all. The Parks Department mows the golf course, all the city parks, the baseball fields, and I have no idea how many acres they're responsible for.
Okay.
Is this a 3-year contract again, or just a 1 year?
It's an annual contract with an inflation factor, but it is for 3 years.
Okay.
And it's renewable. Either the owner or the contractor can elect not to renew it either annually or 3 years.
Okay, that was my question. Okay. so either one can.
Okay, any further
With ample
questions?
notice, either one can cancel.
Other questions for Mr. Kowal? Thank you.
Okay.
We have 3 action items. Is there any public comment? Further discussion?
Well, and this may not be politically correct, but this is kind of putting your money where your mouth is. And the reason I said that is, for being on the commission for 6 years, probably the thing I've heard the most about is when we are not mowing things correctly. So this is considerably more money than I'd like to spend on mowing, but I think the public has criticized us at times for the way Belmont's looked or other areas because we weren't mowing often enough, and it looked like it was, road and just didn't look attractive. So I guess to me, we're doing, this is answering to what the public's asked us to do.
I agree.
That was a motion, I'll second it.
That wasn't, but okay, I'll start then, okay?
Question, affecting this will be billed per mowing, as I understand.
Yeah, the contractor is responsible for keeping track of how often they mow each location, and they bill us monthly, but it's per mowing, and it is broken out by location, and each one has a specific cost. And there again, that's to allow for different types of equipment, access, those kinds of things, to try to get the best cost for each location.
So if it rains for 2 weeks straight and they can't mow, we won't be billed.
Right, and if they mow it when it's wet and it has big windrows in it, they won't be paid until it's cleaned up, so.
Or if it doesn't rain for 2 weeks and the grass doesn't grow, or 2 months.
Yeah, no, we have an option, if it turns to dust bowl days in August or September, to reduce the frequency as well, but.
I would note, we do get complaints about those individual weeds standing tall in the drought situation. So and we may make the determination that we need it to be mowed just to keep the weeds under control.
Well, let spring begin.
Yes, hear you.
Okay. Mayor Longbine, I move that we authorize, that we award the contract to Fox Lawn and Landscaping LLC for right-of-way mowing with the add alternate for weekly mowing for a total of $265,140.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to award the contract to Fox Lawn and Landscaping LLC for right-of-way mowing with the add alternate for weekly mowing for a total of $265,140. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Bring us to the next item.
Mayor Longbine, I move that we award the contract to Fox Lawn and Landscaping LLC for detention pond mowing for a total of $15,823.76.
Second.
Motion and a second to award the contract to Fox Lawn and Landscaping LLC for detention lawn mowing for a total of $15,823.76. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0.
Mayor Longbine, I move that we award the contract to Fox Lawn and Landscaping LLC for Centennial ditch mowing for a total of $2,861.37.
Second.
Motion and a second to award the contract to Fox Lawn and Landscaping LLC for Centennial ditch mowing for a total of $2,861.37. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. We have no developmental business. Is other business, any commissioner have a item they would like to bring forward? That will bring us to citizens forum. If you have a comment for something not on the agenda, please limit your comments to 3 minutes. Okay, I think we wore everyone out. That will bring us to an executive session. You have a time and an estimate.
Sorry, 20 minutes, Mayor.
Mayor Longby and I move the city commission recess into executive session for 20 minutes to discuss with legal counsel the subject of confidential legal considerations relating to points of negotiations with Salina Destination Development LLC regarding the city's multifamily housing project based upon the need for consultation with an attorney for the public body, which would be deemed privileged in the attorney-client relationship pursuant to KSA 75-4319B2. The open meeting will resume in this room at
Could we
6.
add 3 minutes, make the math easy?
Okay.
3-minute break before we
3-minute
start.
break would make this at 6 what then?
6:15 to 6:35?
6:30 till, we're resuming this room at 6:35.
Thank you.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to recess into executive session after a 3-minute break for 20 minutes. The open meeting will resume in this room at 6:35. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries.
Mayor and Commissioners, attendees, in addition to yourselves, will include Stephen Sparks, our special counsel, Greg Bankson, legal counsel, myself, Deputy City Manager Jacob Wood, Assistant City Manager Sean Hennessy, Director of Community Development Services Lauren Driscoll. I'm trying to see if you have anybody else with you. I think that's it.
See you at 6:35. Okay, we are back in regular session. We have no action to take. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion is second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.